Are Americans, as we speak, blind to the imminency of another massive world war? Do we stand at the precipice of military destruction, the likes of which our planet has never seen before? And if so, how prepared is the U.S. military complex to confront such a potentially world-changing conflict? What would this event look like, and who would suffer the most dire of consequences if it comes to pass? Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis joins us to answer these questions and more right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to SkyWatch Television. I'm Joe Artis-Horn. Today, we continue with our special guest. He's an expert on national security and foreign affairs whose service includes working on multinational programs for the Department of the Army at the Pentagon, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis. He's here with a warning, and it resides in the brand new Defender Publishing book, Preparing for World War III, A Global Conflict That Redefines Tomorrow. So if you missed last week's program, go back to the archives wherever it is that you watch SkyWatch Television. Hopefully you're watching from the SkyWatch TV mobile app that's available at the App Store, where we can't be canceled or deleted, suppressed, shadow banned, etc. We talked a lot last week about the players that have an interest in, regardless of the re-election of Donald Trump. Even as he's sitting there at the time of this recording, president-elect, and we discussed he's likely making phone calls to global leaders and he's trying to get cooler heads to stave off the idea that we're facing an imminent World War III. Right. You put on a clinic last week in which you basically asserted that we are more ready for a World War III now in terms of the likelihood of one than we've ever seen before, but we're not prepared in terms of a military response like your average American probably assumes that we are. If you missed last week, you have to go back to the archives and get caught up. It's all in the book, Preparing for World War III. But right on the back of what I just set up, Bob, in your view, what do you think the average American's view is of the likelihood of a World War III? Do you think they're taking it seriously?
Yeah, in 2024, Joe, a nationwide survey of Americans found that 2/3 believe that the current Ukraine war could morph into World War III. Perhaps because Vladimir Putin keeps threatening nuclear war. Perhaps because of the instability we find in the East Asia arena. You know, the Middle East has come apart from Israel to, Yemen to Iran, all the way up into Iraq and Syria and so forth. So there's not much peace in today's world. And so people just kind of come to the conclusion that, things are not going the right direction. And we don't feel stable because we've had an administration that seems to, poke the bear all the time and give them, reason to strike out at us. So there's a lot of concern out there.
What tangible indicators, and I know we touched on this a little bit last week, but what are some of the tangible indicators that suggest that we are actually heading for a world war? And who else do you think agrees with the assertion that it's closer than most people think?
Well, Elon Musk, who of course is advising President-elect Trump, says that we're walking toward World War III. He says, in fact, because we have all these crises that are layered upon one another, that is going to lead to something worse than World War I, World War II. President-elect Trump has made that statement too, and he's blamed a lot, rightly so, on the weakness that's been generated by President Biden. The Chinese have made a very clear statement about the wall of steel, the ready to fight, calling on his generals, and that's not hyperbole. Putin, of course, keeps rattling his saber, says, look, I've got the world's largest nuclear arsenal. I've already lost 600,000, but I'm willing to lose more. And he's going to bring all his friends to the fight. And he's daring NATO, and of course we have some less than smart politicians such as Macron in France who, are baiting Putin by saying, we're going to send NATO troops into Ukraine to defend Kyiv. Well, that's, why don't you just help Putin another way? He really needs encouragement, and that's sort of insanity. But that's kind of the world that we are living in. It's very dangerous.
You talked last week about some of what could happen in terms of technological warfare. Our cell phones just get cut off. suddenly our city grids, maybe our water supply just gets cut off. And, you correctly asserted that, people suddenly without their cell phones and their comforts, and how fast, that could change the landscape in terms of communities turning on each other. I don't even know that they would need to invade, just shut off access to our information and then watch people eat themselves.
Yep.
But apart from that, are there other, you talk about a full scope global war. What other ramifications or side effects might we see here in the United States and in Western civilization? Are we talking mushroom clouds? Are we talking bombs that we've never seen going off in places we can't imagine? Are we talking about EMPs over places like New York? I mean, what in your view do you think is plausible?
Yes, all of that and more. Technology is changing the battlefield for all of us because it's readily available. Directed energy weapons are now readily available. We can fry something hundreds of miles away in some cases, either from space or from the ground. Cyber tech, cyber bullets, they will cripple our machines, they'll cripple our water system, our electric system. Much of that's already been embedded in the code in some of our major power companies. Intelligence tech, all those satellites up there, the thousands of them are great, and they provide information from the top down as to what's going on the ground to everybody, not just us, to the terrorists and to the other nations and the like, Russians, Chinese, others. Certainly nuclear tech. It's not an exaggeration to say that the Russians have improved their nuclear capabilities. Putin may have denied his people certain things, but he has not denied his nuclear forces modernization. We have. We have seriously degraded our capability. We may have 5,000 warheads, but not that many of them are operational. Same thing with ballistic missiles, and the Russians have really improved their ballistic missile delivery, especially the hypersonics, which we've seen demonstrated on a couple of occasions in Ukraine. And I got a question earlier from someone else about our ability to knock down hypersonics. It's limited. Even our PAC-3s, our Patriots, are limited in their capabilities. They may be good against what the Iran is shooting at Israel, but not necessarily a hypersonic that China or Russia would shoot. And yet they've demonstrated, the Russians, their ability to use these. Autonomous technology, the drone war world has radically changed everything. You can kill a tank with a small drone if you know what you're doing. And even the people in Ukraine, some very young warriors have figured out how to use drones in a way that is devastating. And the Russians have too. And of course, the Russians get a lot of help from China behind the scenes and from Iran. So you have those sorts of things. The other technologies that we're right on the cusp of coming up to, you can't see targets, you can't see ships, you can't see tanks. You have super accurate technologies that are delivering arsenals of killing to large groups. The technology is phenomenal. We don't exclusively own it. We have some of it. And we haven't been equipping our forces, much like the Chinese have, more so than us. So with technology, with the change in warfare, I use the illustration that we used to think we could dig a hole deep enough and be far enough away that we cannot be reached. That's no longer the case. With precision, just what we gave Zelensky and the Ukrainians. We gave them ATACMS. ATACMS have a range of 190 miles. With that, he can shoot at a meter square accurately from 190 miles away. And we have munitions that can penetrate the ground, and the second munition can go much deeper. So I don't care how deep you dig. I'll get a munition that will kill whatever is in the bottom. So that really defeats the whole idea that there's a safe place. There's not a safe place. We'll know where you are. We'll listen to what you're doing. We'll cut off your cyber, your internet. We will be able to devastate whatever you think you have safety in. It's not a pretty scene, but it's where we are today. And then, I go back to the coming judgment and I think, okay, what does it mean by the heavens will roar in 2 Peter 3? I can imagine it could be a roar, somewhat of what I've described there. Things will disappear, things will vanish. We can crystallize things. It's a frightening reality. That's the weaponry that we've equipped our modern armed forces with, and it's not just ours. That's the
Right.
problem.
You know, in terms of looking back through history, you have a really interesting perspective. Are there key causes of the past two world wars that you think, in terms of, you know, maybe repeating itself, or even if it's just anecdotal or nuanced, that you think is maybe playing out again? Perhaps there were things we didn't learn from last time, or dynamics that might look very mirrored to what we saw in the first two that are playing out again.
Well, everybody knows about Neville Chamberlain and his appeasement to the Nazis during World War II, or prior to World War II. You know, you had the loss of Austria, the loss of Czechoslovakia, and finally on, September the 1st, 1939, Hitler rolls the Wehrmacht into Poland. Well, it wasn't but a day later that finally Britain says, oh, enough. It's time to join the war because Hitler's serious. We've been appeasing
Yeah.
Xi. When in 1972, Richard Nixon went with Kissinger to then Peking, now Beijing, and we started this relationship. Well, we've naively cultivated a relationship that has made them a giant today at our own expense. And our politicians have rushed over there to celebrate their own victories. Our industry has been lost. We've shipped everything over there. And so here we are without the right industrial base to recapitalize ourselves. We have given away a lot of our own influence across the world by being so naively stupid.
Right.
And it's what it is.
Yeah.
The same thing with the Russians. But historically, appeasement has been a problem. The arms buildup, and I think I alluded to that in the first program. Certainly the alliances. It used to be that Russia and China were kind of enemies, but friends. Now it's much, much closer.
Sure,
They're collaborating,
sure.
cooperating. Of course, I've been saying that for years in Defender books, but people haven't been listening. Now they're beginning to come to realization
Some
that
of
I've
them are
been
starting
wrong.
to listen now.
They really are.
Yeah.
But it's a bit late in this development. So we have that. We have the alliance systems are stronger today. On the other side, I go through in the book a whole host of
Yeah,
things. It's
yeah.
not just the industrial base or appeasement or alliances or buildup of arms. The list goes on. We purposely antagonize our enemies after a war and set them up for anger against us. That's what happened with the Treaty of Versailles, and it led Hitler to be the radical that he became. And it's just bad diplomacy. We in our diplomatic world don't do all that well at training people how to stay out of war.
Right.
Our national security strategy has what's called an integrated deterrence, and I talk about that in one of the chapters.
Yeah.
Our deterrence against war ought to be as strong as our preparation for war, and yet this administration, I don't think they understand anything about deterrence. It's about the use of the powers of the state to cause things to happen. Now, Mr. Trump did in the first administration. He used the sanctions. He used the threat of military action and actually followed up
through,
with
yeah.
Soleimani and others. They got the message.
Very
we'll
quickly.
kill him and you're next. And so you better be cautious. So the whole idea of integrated deterrence is totally lost, from I can see, in this administration. And that's part of why we got into the situation that we are today.
Yeah. Some people hope and also believe, but also hope that, countries like China feel that they need us. So even when they're saber rattling and posturing, that, financially they need us to keep consuming products that are coming in because they stand to make trillions and so forth. I don't know if they're disincentivized if you start tariffing them to the point where we're no longer just this giant money salad that they can come and take advantage of. Where are the military's readiness gaps, preparation for World War III?
We have 2/3 the size of the military that we need for one regional war. Our strategy, the national defense strategy that we have, calls for one regional war capability. And yet we see a war in Europe, we see a war in the Middle East, we see a war in Asia.
Right.
So we should have at least 2, if not 3.
Do you think that China is economically at a place now where they don't feel they need us, or was that just an American misconception all along, in your view?
Well, the Chinese are beginning to tariff us and to deny us certain rare earth metals, to begin to wean themselves off of certain things that we produce. And that's important to understand.
Yeah.
They're not stupid. They do have demographic problems. They do have economic problems, but they're beginning to diversify. Here recently, if you were following what happened down in Peru and in Brazil with President Xi, where was Biden in the picture? He was in the back corner. I think the guy got lost in the Brazilian Amazon. But the guy that was front and center was Xi. And what has happened is we've had a complete revolution in terms of authority and alliance in the Southern Hemisphere, especially in South America, where they're aligning very closely. In Peru, they built this $3.5 billion port. They invested, the Chinese, in the Peruvian port. Why? Deep water port. Did they really need one? But it's great for aircraft carriers and submarines. They built 40 in Latin and South America. Why? Is it just because they want to do some trade? Of course they want to trade. And they have good trade relations. Not only, recently they signed, 40 trade relations with Mexico or something. So when you look at the entire region, they're captivating South America. Now, they've already captured much of Africa. If you look at all over Africa, they've used the Belt and Road Initiative. They've taken over major allied areas from Kenya all the way to Nigeria. And they'd like to get Morocco. I don't know if they will right now. But that continent, the South American continent, now the Australians are pushing back. We're very cozy with the Australians. Indians have some accommodation. Eastern Europeans they're seized by war. It's interesting. Most people don't know the Chinese consider themselves an Arctic country. Do you know that?
I did not know that.
No, they do. They have icebreakers. Where would they use icebreakers? They're not going to use it near Beijing. They're not going to use it in East China or South China Sea. They use it cutting a pathway across the northern part of Russia, working with the Russians. Why? Well, it's cheaper to ship to Europe through that passage. It is warming up a bit. But mineral exploitation is critical. Energy, rare earth metals, other things. It's rich up there. They intend to capture as much as they can. And so they've invested their underwater drones to map the entire Arctic floor.
Wow.
Why?
Wow.
Because they want to find all these minerals. They want to know where they can begin to extract. Same thing with the moon, of course. They have every intention of getting to the moon with a colony in a couple of years. The Chinese are making they've already landed on the dark side of the moon. I wish they'd stay there, but they're making great inroads with regard to what's happening on space technologies. Not only can they shoot our stuff down with lasers, but they have these special satellites that can go up and grab and destroy or cripple. Russians are working on that. We have some, but not clearly what we need. And space is critical. So whether it's the Arctic or it's space or it's South America, they are on the move and they're making great inroads. They do have problems, but they also have big visions, and they're very, very hegemonic in their ways.
They've even made big moves in our own country, buying up our farmland, sending their students to our universities, buying up our real estate. So
you mean they're spies they send to our universities? Yes, they do. They send a lot of spies because you don't come to America without having someone that's going to check on you and make sure you're providing them with the necessary information. It hurts us.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now is the time to understand what the global powers that be are planning to unleash in an effort to perpetuate continued conflict on the world stage, regardless of the changing of presidencies or the will of citizens. SkyWatch TV urges you to take advantage of the Preparing for World War III Hyper Collection. This incredible collection includes not only Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis' new book, Preparing for World War III, A Global Conflict That Redefines Tomorrow, but it also includes his best-selling book, Progressive Evil, How Radicals Are Redefining America's Rights, Institutions, and Ideals, Making Her Globally Irrelevant for the End Times. Now, you'll receive both of these urgently needed works, but that's not all. You'll also receive the Shadowland book and companion DVD that exposes everything from Jeffrey Epstein to the Clintons to the occult elite and reveals the deep state actors at war with Christianity, Donald Trump, and America's destiny. These best-selling features are both by the internationally acclaimed best-selling author Dr. Thomas Horn, with foreword by Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis. Sold separately, these items hold a retail value of over $85. Yours now for your donation of only $45, which includes free shipping to all U.S. orders. You can support the ministry of SkyWatch TV and help us continue spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout the four corners of the world right now by scanning the QR code on your screen, using the camera app on your phone for instant access to this special opportunity. Visit us at skywatchtvstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985 and ask for the Preparing for World War III Hyper Collection right now. It is not a special opportunity that you want to miss out on. Make sure you get your copy of Preparing for World War III with just a few minutes left on the clock, Bob. One of the things that I feel trends in Christianity, especially on social media, I seem to see this pattern of people that have said things like almost attaching a spirituality to the fact that Donald Trump has survived, 2 impeachments, and they've come after him with lawfare, and they've weaponized departments of the government, to go after his children and to blow up his own personal businesses. And there have been people calling for his arrest, and they've raided his home, and then he gets shot in the ear and, comes this close to being assassinated on live television. There are people that are attaching the will of God to all of that. They're just proclaiming it as if it's the will of God, that this is only the power of God that could have spared him through all of these things. Therefore, he must be the man of the hour. God has anointed him for such a time as this. He's put him in place, and it's going to be because of revival. And don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I love the fact that Donald Trump was elected. If we're going to have this conversation about the potential of a World War III, I would much rather be having it with the prospect that he will be safely inaugurated on January 20th and be the one to reside, at least politically, in the White House, as opposed to what we've been dealing with for the last 4 years, believe me. But do you attach the same level of God-ordainedness, that he was chosen by God? God is using him to bring healing to America. Or as a military expert, do you just look at simple math, numbers, military moves, counter moves, and kind of divorce yourself from the spiritual sides of it and look more at the pragmatic blueprints of what countries are going to do, the realities of, like you've said in the last couple of weeks, there are certain things we can't unwind magically just because Donald Trump ends up in the White House here in a couple of months. Do you assign any spirituality, or is it kind of a to be continued? Let's see what happens. Let's see how this plays out.
Well, we're spiritual beings. Like Esther was told, you've been placed here for a time like this. I think that, yes, God spared his life. God has allowed him to suffer tremendously under the lawfare, certainly the impeachments and so forth. I don't know what God has in mind long term. It has certainly energized the culture, a certain portion of this culture, to his viewpoint, and persuaded people I never thought would come to a different position. And that may be why the Lord allowed this to happen. What we don't need to do, Joe, is to put our confidence in a man that is flawed like we are. Yeah, he was empowered by and saved miraculously by God's hand. However, there's so much that has gone wrong in this world, so much that needs to be fixed, and so much that is stacked against us at this point because of negligence over many, many years, that we need to, take the spirit of determination to turn this around, but we need not be naive that one man is a miracle worker. He's put in place some very good people, assuming they get the nod from the Senate, and they will do their absolute best to turn things around. But I said this first program that this is a giant aircraft carrier. Just because you want to turn it, it's not going to turn that easily. There's so much resistance. The spiritual issue has to be taken into account. You know, we're constantly in a spiritual battle. We really are. And that's what's happening, I think, to a large degree in this country today. Whether it's the southern border, it's the destruction of our large cities, it's the economy and hurting people. You know, these are all, to the core, I would say, a spiritual issue that we have to come to deal with. So what the Christian ought to do is not put their faith in Donald Trump, but put their faith in God and be part of the solution.
Yes.
Unfortunately, too often, we want to sit back and say, well, let him do it. He's done so well. Well, God used him as a messenger, you know, whether he knows it or not. And the message is, we need to put our faith in the Lord. We need to recognize where we are today and then go forth.
I love that. Amen.
Amen to that.
These are never long enough. And we are going to deal in next week's program with more about what the Christian can do to start helping to pray our way out of this. And let me tell you something. There are things you can do civilly. You can primary people if you don't feel they reflect your views. You can help drain the swamp with your voting lever and so forth. But if you misunderstand that revival is not by way of who is elected into the White House, that's a completely separate issue. I love putting people in positions of leadership that reflect my morality. I love the fact that they're going to be doing things to try to help rectify some of the insanity that's made it into the school curriculum. I love those things, but that is not revival.
That's right.
Revival actually often happens under the worst of times because people finally get desperate enough to cry out to the Messiah for help.
That's right.
So
that's right.
What Bob is saying is 100% right on. You have to keep your hope in not finite things, not temporal elected positions, but in the God who created each one of us. Ladies and gentlemen, the book is Preparing for World War III, a global conflict that redefines tomorrow. Unfortunately, we're all out of time, but don't despair. Join us next week when Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis returns to talk about the emerging new technologies that are redefining the future of war. For everybody here in studio, everybody on panel, Bob, thank you so much for joining us once again. I'm Joe Ardishorn. Keep your eyes on the prize, which is Jesus Christ. We'll be back. SkyWatch TV urges you to take advantage of the Preparing for World War III Hyper Collection. This incredible collection includes not only Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis' new book, Preparing for World War III, a global conflict that redefines tomorrow, but it also includes his best-selling book, Progressive Evil, how radicals are redefining America's rights, institutions, and ideals, making her globally irrelevant for the end times. Now, you'll receive both of these urgently needed works, but that's not all. You'll also receive the Shadowland book and companion DVD. Sold separately, these items hold a retail value of over $85. Yours now for your donation of only $45, which includes free shipping to all U.S. orders. You can support the ministry of SkyWatch TV and help us continue spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout the four corners of the world right now by scanning the QR code on your screen, using the camera app on your phone for instant access to this special opportunity. Visit us at skywatchtvstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985 and ask for the Preparing for World War III Hyper Collection right now.